Ah, greetings. Welcome back. Yeah, listen. I was not too satisfied with that basic build advice that I made like nearly a year ago at this point. Good lord, time surely does fly when you're killing monsters. But yeah, so I decided I'd try to, redo it just a bit. Try and make it more basic. Try to keep the rambling to a minimum. So, yeah, we'll try and be kind of brief. After all, basic is in the name. So, for starters, what I say is not absolute truth, because there are better ways of doing things. Not quite min-max, essentially. Kind of close. There's a lot of efficiency in what I do and the builds I make, but not quite perfect, I would say. Mostly because I kind of build things in a way for solo, but I do understand different builds and how they stats and whatnot. But yeah, so think of this not as gospel, but as a professional opinion from someone that has nearly 40 characters at this point. Good lord. Time flies when you're killing monsters. Oh man. Yeah. So, for starters, the different build archetypes and I guess you could say sub-archetypes. So there's the Holy Trinity, the default archetypes. The tanks, the healers, the damage dealers. That's in this game. Across the 9 different paths available to you. Paths are what classes are called, by the way, in this game. So there's those 3. And then there's the sub-archetypes. Now, these can be applied to the Holy Trinity and also to each other. So, there's 3 main ones. There's the Bruiser, which is an even amount of defense and attack and, sustain. And then there's Mixed Passive. Mixed Passive is essentially utilizing both attack and magic using these 2 passives on the side of the tree. Just to deal with any damage type that comes your way, or any type of tanky enemy, I should say. And then there's crit. Yeah, you heard right. You can throw crit on any path, really. Crit Guardian? Sure, go for it. Why not? Basically, if you stack enough crit on any path, they're going to crit, and they're going to hit pretty hard. So, obviously, some paths do it better than others, but in general, if you want to try a crit build on something that's not supposed to be a crit build, that's totally possible. And yeah, and as I said, these things affect each other. You can have a Bruiser mixed passive build. You can have a mixed passive crit build. You can have a Bruiser crit build, etc., Or a Bruiser mixed passive crit build. I've done that before. Oh, man. Yeah, Jack of all trades kind of spread you thin in this game. I won't lie. And yes, this game in its, I guess, balance, you can make anything work. Between the tree, the affinity, and your God-given equipment, anything will work. I promise. Now, will it work as well as other things? Probably not, but if you have an idea for a build, you can take it to in-game convincingly, is what I'm trying to say. It's viable in some way or another. So yeah. So that is the start of this little thing here. So, a quick overview of the stats. Because these stats are kind of self-explanatory, but some things are not quite. For example, your magic defense and your defense 50% damage reduction at 500 defense. That just means you're getting full defense per point. But after 500, you get half as much defense per point. So if you're at like 600 defense, you're gonna have 55% damage reduction for that defense type. So something to keep in mind there. The elemental power. These are multipliers on your damage. I know it can be a little confusing because the base damage of attack and magic say 1% as well. No, these are multipliers. They are really good for scaling up your damage if you don't want to go crit. Essentially, that's what they're good for. And elemental resistances, they do not work the way they say they do, or at least perhaps they do. In the formula they take is just not obvious. So I don't know, but basically, it is not as simple as 1% damage reduction per point. It's not quite that good, but they are still pretty good overall. Like, if you want to get a little bit more bulk and you just happen to have gear that gives you it, yeah, it's pretty good, but it's not quite 1% damage reduction there. And I think that is all in terms of these stats that are a little confusing, I'll say. Well, like, the stats that don't really explain themselves too well. I guess the defense kind of does, but we're rambling now. Let's move on. Right, so affinity versus equipment, right? And of course, your tree is going to give you stats regardless, but a quick gist of it: strength and will. Those are going to be your 2 damage stats. You're going to need a lot of those. And if you want more damage, you can get more, some damaging gear. But basically, if you want to build damage, go for strength or will first, and then add more with equipment. That's kind of the main gist of this, really. Start with affinity, fine-tune with equipment. Strength and will, start with those things, and if you want some more, get some, with attack or magic equipment, essentially. Endurance. Now, endurance. If you need all 3 stats, it's better to pump up more endurance. Now, most builds will likely have endurance anyway, because you can only put 100 points in a stat, and you get 150, right? But say if you have a lot of defense and magic defense, and you need heal power, better to go for heal power on your equipment. And, same goes vice versa. If you have a lot of heal power, but you need defenses, go for defense gear as opposed to just pumping up your endurance as high as you want. Of course, you can do that if you wish, right? I'm just speaking in terms of efficiency. If you need all 3 stats, go for endurance. If you need 1 or 2, use gear, essentially. Although for most builds, it's not going to, you're going to need all 3 anyway, but beside the point. Dexterity. Now, dexterity, kind of an odd one. If you need agility or evasion, it's easier to build it from dexterity, because it's really hard to get agility and evasion from gear. However, crit on gear is rather prevalent and also has the side benefit of giving you crit power. A lot of crit gear comes coupled with crit power, which is kind of what rogues rely on to deal a lot of damage on top of their crits. So, and you can use dexterity to get even more. If I can get to the right screen, you can use it to get even more. But really, at least in my case, I have found that you don't really need dexterity. If you're bulky enough or whatever, you don't need dexterity at some point for crit chance, I should say. But if you want to crit a lot, go for it. But you don't need dexterity, strictly speaking, as a rogue, as much, of course. Right, so that's kind of affinity and gear. Health and sustain. So health and sustain, important, but not super important. They are nice to have. Heal power, multiplayer or solo, you will need some heal power. Well, for the end game anyway. I mean, I guess you kind of do for mid to early game. But late game, you will want some heal power. Not only solo, I mean, obviously you're going to need to keep yourself alive, but in multiplayer, you're going to keep yourself alive so there's less strain on your healers. You know, healers have a limited amount of heals before they run out. So if you're missing some health and your healer is trying to, heal someone else, or better yet, doesn't want to waste a heal on you, being at like 75% health or something like that, yeah, better to just heal yourself with like lifesteal or whatever. All paths in the game have ways of keeping their health high between lifesteal, percent-based heals, and shields, if you counter or if you're a warden, essentially. All paths have ways of doing that, or I guess evasion as well if you're a monk or a ranger. But yeah, and health, you don't need health essentially, but if you can get it on some gear, it's really nice. If you can get the Warrior's 25-point passive, it's also really nice. Having extra gear will make it so you heal yourself more from percent-based heals. Heals that say percent of your max health. Yeah, it's nice. Don't sleep on health and sustain, or health and heal power, I should say. Even if your path doesn't really, have that sort of theme for one or the other. Don't sleep on those. Right. A quick side thing for early leveling, because this is a basic build advice. Would kind of feel wrong to leave out early game builds, and mid game, I suppose. Possibly late game as well. So yeah, early game, I would say go for all defense gear. Yeah, turns out defense gear gives a lot, like a lot. If I can go over here somewhere. Like for example, this helmet here gives 11 defense, magic defense. It may not seem like much, but compared to say, for example, just pretend like this is a helmet, okay? Compared to 14 magic, not really that big a difference. Yeah, between like, well, I didn't want this to be rambly, but basically, attacking magic, less of a thing early on. You don't need a whole lot of it, essentially. But defenses you kind of will need, because they are nice to deal with enemies that crit you all the time and evade you all the time. So basically, defensive gear, and for your stats, for your affinity stats, regardless of what path you are, I would recommend going half endurance. So if you're a mage, you go half will and half endurance. It's like half damage, half endurance, basically. If you're a rogue, half strength, half endurance. You don't need dexterity when you're a rogue early on, because dexterity or crits in general are not going to be all that good until like floor 7 or so. Yeah, below floor 7, you're not really going to care about crits when you're a rogue. I mean, they will happen because of critical shooting, but I wouldn't go in expecting you to crit all the time, essentially. And same thing for warriors, half strength, half endurance. It really gives you a nice balance of everything. The heal power, especially, is really good for rogues and warriors because they don't have any on their tree, and it's hard to come by on gear at low level. So yeah, just something to keep in mind there. Yeah, so that is that. Now for the late game, Grand Dungeon, when you get to Grand Dungeon, it's going to feel weird because enemies will not hit you as hard, but they will take forever to kill compared to Floor 8, right? Floor 8 is the previous dungeon floor, like the highest over here is floor 8, and then you hit level 80 and you go to Grand Dungeon. Essentially, when you get to Grand Dungeon, focus more on attack and magic, or just your upfront damage. Essentially, you're not really going to need as much defense because early on, enemies are not going to hit that hard. And I mean, also early on, you will die. You will struggle in Grand Dungeon when you first get there. Don't worry about it. It's meant to be that way. Like, you'll level really quickly regardless, so it's okay. If you die to like room 4, the first boss, at level 80, that's normal. Okay, that's fine. If you get past that first boss, hey, good for you. But it's not that big a deal if you can't get past it. You will eventually when you level up and get better stuff and whatnot. So yeah, just a quick aside for leveling builds. Okay, well, I probably should mention, when you're leveling, you get 2 free respecs in the game. There are 2 infinite respecs. If you want to try different paths or builds out while you're leveling, you can. But those infinite free respec potions go away when you level up. So at level 30 and 70, you will get free respecs. But when you hit 31 and 71 respectively, they will go away. Essentially, it allows you to just play around with things, and you can kind of use that to level a character. Like, if you're trying to play a build that's going to be hell to level up, like, mixed passive crit builds, good lord, you can just level as a warrior, all the way to level 70, and then go respec into whatever build you want to play to the end game. A nice little tip for anyone trying to level a second or third character and want to know the good stuff. But yeah. Right. So, I forgot about that. Oh, well, this is gonna be all over the place. It's okay. YouTube has like a chapter feature. It's all right. Some quick random facts here, just to help you decide your build and whatnot. The max amount of skill points and affinity points in the game is 150. Yeah. It is at the rate, every 10 levels you get 5 free skill points and affinity points, basically. At level 100, you have 150. Oh, I'm sorry. I hope you didn't hear that. And let's see. So, deflect damage, just a random thing here. Deflect damage, it is based on your max health. Just, so something to know. The chance is based on your defenses, but the actual damage you inflict is based on your max health. Unless the enemy that hits you hits for less than the percentage of your max health. I believe it's 5% of your max health. So if an enemy hits for less than that, they're going to, you're going to deflect them for that exact amount, essentially. Just some random facts that I forgot to mention. Yeah. So, I suppose I will kind of get into the numbers. I kind of didn't want to dive deep into the numbers, really, in the first video, and I kind of don't want to do it here. But just to give a general rule, like, this isn't some like threshold to hit maximum efficiency or anything. The difference between stats, not that big a deal. Like, the difference between 850 attack and 900 attack, I mean, there is a difference, but it's not that much of one, really. So just right quick, right? In general, regardless of what build you are, unless you're a tank or a healer, I guess a tank, really. Solo or multiplayer, if you're not mixed passive, if you have one damage type, get a good example over here. If you have one damage type, aim for 950 attack or magic, whichever one you have. You can go higher like no big deal. You can go higher, but if you want like max efficiency here, 950 is the turning point in which your elemental power or your crit power, if you're a crit build, is a bit better than just stacking more attack and magic. Of course, it's not that much more efficient. Like, so if it's easier for you to just keep getting more attack or magic, yeah, go for it. No big deal. And you can go lower if you have a lot of elemental power, of course. You don't have to get 950 exactly or more than that. Like this druid, for example. Or I guess if you're just not really a damage dealer, like druids aren't really damage dealers. They can deal damage, no doubt. But, because of the role as a healer, you don't really need that much. Or as much, I should say. So 950 if you're not mixed passive, 1 damage type. If you are mixed passive, aim for at least 900. I know that can be difficult. Well, the game's having a hard time. I know that can be difficult for some certain paths that don't have as much damage on the tree. But just try to aim for that. If you have like 880, close enough, essentially. Oh well. Man, it must be real bad. Oh well, we'll just do it from here. Excuse me. So, that is that, right? And going over the different sub-archetypes, right? Because the sub-archetypes are kind of based on those stats. Right, so Bruisers, same deal, right? 950 attacker magic or 900 attack and magic, whichever one you have there. But the difference with Bruisers is I try to aim for around 300 in both defenses. The more the better, really, unless you're doing solo, in which case you want some heal power to go with that, because defenses reduce your heal power, but getting sidetracked there. But yeah, aim for around 300, 270, 350, it's about the same, really. Well, compared to 300, I should say. And then for mages, try to get, for a bruiser mage, try to go for 350, 400 heal power. That's not that hard to get for a bruiser mage. Not at all. Because your heals, heals don't deal damage, at least most of them don't. You're going to want to heal a lot more than the damage you're going to take, so you're going to need a lot of heal power to make that happen, essentially. Because you're skipping a turn to heal yourself, essentially. Don't want that to be wasted. So yeah, there's that. As for Bruisers, Warriors, just try to get as much heal power as you can. 200 is good enough. With Warriors, you kind of have a lot of bulk already, so you're not really going to need to heal yourself as much, especially with the Warrior final passives. Like these final passives over here, they will kind of keep your health high regardless. So let's see. So that's Bruisers, right? That's kind of their whole thing. Mixed passives. Yeah, well, I did mention that. Yeah, mixed passives aim for 900 attack and magic. Crit builds, right? That depends on what kind of crit build you are. If you're going bruiser crit, like if you're a bruiser but you want some crit on the side and you're not solely focused on crit, I would say go for like 700, 800. Now, of course, if your main source of healing is lifesteal, you're probably going to want some more a crit chance than that. But essentially, bruiser crit, 700, 800. If you're not bruiser crit, if you're like glass cannon, try and aim for like 1300, 1400. The more the better, of course. Crit is really hard to pull off these days. Like, sometimes you just want crit, like 3 or 4 turns in a row. Even with critical shooting up, it kind of sucks. But yeah, having just that much crit will help with that. So yeah, that's the crit. Now, crit power. I would say 50 is kind of as much as you would kind of care to want, if that makes sense. Going above 50 will likely mean that you will start sacrificing your damage. Now, of course, if you have enough damage to take that, then yeah, go for it. But essentially, 50 is plenty. 60, if you can do that, go for it. 40, also plenty. Like you can work with 40 on a 40 crit power on a rogue, I should say. So yeah, just some numbers there, just some goals, I guess you could say. Not exactly set in stone, but yeah, yeah. Oh well, okay. I guess I didn't talk about the tanks, right? So tanks, you're gonna want at least 500 in both defenses. As I said before, uh, 500 is like the soft cap, so your defense is half as effective. Uh, in the case of Guardians, though, Guardians, because they're so focused on deflecting, you can go higher than 500 convincingly. Like, because defenses, yeah, their damage reduction is half as effective past 500, but their deflect chance is not. It stays at that 0.1% per point. So for Guardians, there's an argument to be made that you could go for like 700, 800, which is definitely possible in this game. You will kind of just sacrifice some of your other stats. Like Guardians that can deal damage is kind of nice. Like if I have Guardians that are 900 attack or magic that can help deal damage as well as tanks. So just something to keep in mind with that. Uh, yeah, so that's that. Yeah, I think that's all for the stats here. Just like the rough numbers there. Yeah. Oh, all right. Well, yeah. Heal power for healers. Okay. That's a side thing, really. For multiplayer, anyway, I would suggest around 600 heal power. That's really easy to reach for a druid or bard, which are the two main healers in the game. Uh, yeah, 600. You can go to like 900 if you really, really wanted to, but it's kind of not worth it. You're not really gonna notice it. I mean, you will notice a difference when healing a tank, but when healing yourself or the damage dealer, you're not really going to need 900 heal power for that. And the tank will likely be just fine, not being healed as much, no doubt. So yeah, that heal power for a healer solo. I'd say just 400. Kind of just like the Bruiser Mage is before. 400's fine. 400 is more than fine. Right then. So I guess we'll go over the different paths and kind of talk about their subtypes, the sub archetypes, I should say, just to give you an idea of how each one kind of fares. I should say, I guess you could say. I mean, you can kind of deduce how, like, say, like a crit guardian would play. Actually, well, maybe you wouldn't, because crit guardian is weird. But no, I'll quickly go over each class, each path. I guess we'll start with druid because all of my druids are in this house. So yeah, I'm already here. So oh well. So druid. Druid is the main healer in the game. A big healer all around. Essential for multiplayer. Although I guess if you don't have a druid, you can go heal bard as well. They are viable heal substitutes. as it were. So Druid, a lot of heal power, a lot of magic defense. All you really need is some physical defense, and you're pretty much good to go. And you can get a lot of that on gear, essentially. A lot of good defense on gear in this game. Pretty easy to gear out, yeah, as you can see. One thing to note about druids, they make really good solo classes, because they are part of the mage tree, and the mage tree does not mess around. They got, the mage tree has some good damaging skills, so the damage of a druid is not that bad at all. Like they deal respectable damage, on top of being able to heal themselves really, really well, like a lot. And having really good defenses as well. Like having like that much magic defense and heal power taken care of for you, like just for free, a lot. It's quite a lot. And plus their final passive just heals them even more. It is rather nice. A really nice path. Multiplayer or solo. All you really need on a druid is just some defense gear and maybe some heal power here and there, and you're good to go. My favorite path in the game, as it stands. So that's just base druid. Mixed passive druid, you have a lot of freedom, because mixed passive mages in general, you have a lot of freedom to just do whatever you want, because there's only one magic path in the game, so you are kind of stuck into 25 Guardian and 25 Bard as your secondary classes, I guess you could say. So, mixed passive druid, you can kind of go for whatever, really. One big thing that I like to do is get some lifesteal from the other paths, like the rogue's lifesteal from down here, the what's it called? Scorching Daggers, Leech Arrow. Because druids have a lot of heal power, these lifesteal skills will actually heal you a lot, even if you don't crit. They will heal you for close to maximum damage that you deal, instead of a quarter damage like Scorching Daggers here. So mixed passive, really nice, especially since mixed passive is also really good for solo. I'll get into that later. So that's that. Crit Druid. Crit Druid, a little weird, a little difficult to pull off, but you can definitely pull it off if I can find the right set. Yeah, so I have found, can't really squeeze in any crit power, sadly, but between the rogue tree and just some crit on the side with gear, you can definitely make an effective crit druid. This one I kind of went for more solo oriented, so I've got some decent defense, some decent attack and magic for a mixed passive build, and an okay amount of crit chance. Like, it's not a lot, but considering I have the rogue tree, I have a critical shooting, not that bad, and plus Winds of Change, rather nice. So crit druid, pretty decent. Crit heals are a thing, but if you're trying to build crit just to heal more, it's not worth it. Using crit power, I should say. Really, if you want to do that, I guess the benefit is that your druid would hit hard and heal hard. But if you want to just use it for heals, it's better to stack more heal power, really. Just a thing. And so that's that. Was there another? Oh, well, I guess the Bruiser Druid. The Bruiser Druid is a druid. They got really good defenses and all that. So that is Druid, a great class. Love it. Right then. So, Necromancer. Necromancers are scary. They are very scary. The highest theoretical damage in the game, because they utilize burst damage, or elemental burst damage. It's a whole thing, I promise. They utilize elemental burst damage and crits on top of that. Now, they are not the best crit builds, but, they're pretty good at critting, with, with evil touch and whatnot. So yeah, that's kind of the main gist with Necromancers. They got burst damage, they got crit damage, and because the mage tree is so like multi-element, they kind of focus on elemental gear. The multipliers I talked about earlier, yeah. And you can kind of see how or why they would be considered scary. Uh, you know, on top of that, they got decent bulk from the Guardian Tree if you're going a normal Necromancer, and a decent amount of heal power to keep themselves alive. Not a bad class at all, not a bad path. Although I guess there are no bad paths in this game, but you know what I mean. So yeah, that's Necromancer, scary path. I don't have examples of the others in this house, so I'll just kind of go over the other ones. So crit Necromancer, you can make that work. Between like going 50 points in Rogue instead of 25 in Guardian Bard, you can do that. That would essentially make you mix passive, but not as good because Necromancers, they buff their magic output, their magic damage output quite a lot. But not so much for their physical damage output. So going mixed passive on a Necromancer does kind of feel a bit weird. Well, a crit Necromancer. I guess Necromancers in general, but yeah, so crit Necromancer, you can make that work. Now, obviously, the more obvious choice compared to this Necromancer would just be to do 50 points in Dexterity for the extra crit chance. That is 200 extra crit chance, and I do believe I have... Okay, I don't have a crit set on this character. I used to. Yeah, you'll have a lot of crit chance there. You'll have like 900 or so. That's quite a lot, actually, for a non-rogue to have that much. So yeah, if you wanted to destroy the world, yeah, you could do 100 will and 50 dexterity and a bunch of crit gear. Yeah, it'd just be scary like that. Mixed passive, same thing I mentioned. They don't really buff their physical damage output, but essentially, it can be useful to have physical damage on a Necromancer because some things just won't really care about what you do to them. Like, they're going to resist magic regardless what you do, so, there's that. And then there is the Bruiser. Again, mages are kind of like Bruisers anyway, so a Bruiser Necromancer. I mean, I guess there's Tank Necromancer. That is a really, really strong option for you. Because they have so much upfront damage, you can afford to just go full tank and just not take damage at all, or hardly any damage. So you'll be able to blow up your enemies while not taking that much damage and still have a decent amount of heal power to just get yourself back to full health. It's a very scary path, I'll say. So yeah, that's Necromancer. Strong option, really strong option. Can't go wrong. Right then, so, Berserkers, yes. Berserkers are, they're just warriors that hit really hard. That's essentially what they are. They got the bulk, the health, the debuffs, the buffs, all that nice stuff from the warrior tree. But then you just throw on some damage on it, so... essentially kind of the physical version of Necromancer minus the crit, but they kind of trade crit for simplicity and extra bulk, really. Well, just an example. Rift is hard to scale because it has 4 different elements, and it's Necromancer's like heavy skill, right? So if you wanted to scale the damage up, you need to invest 4 different elemental powers, essentially. But on Berserker, you can just focus on 1 Earth. So not having crit kind of helps with that. Also, Berserker is a physical path. If you wanted to go crit, you can go on the Rogue tree, which is also physical. So less hullabaloo with all that. But no, Berserker, right. So Berserkers, kind of like a risk-reward sort of path, but not really. Their final passive leaves a little bit to be desired. It used to be really good, but Berserker was a little overpowered, and it kind of got nerfed. Well, I say nerfed. It got balanced, I should say. Um, so yeah, life stealing for free on all damage you deal when your health is low is really nice. Kind of wish it was a bit higher, but again, nerfs and whatnot. Considering you're a warrior with some damage, being at half health is not that bad at all, especially if uh, gear correctly and get some magic defense and all that. Being at half health is not that big a deal. Being at a third health, it can be, but realistically, you'll be just fine if you're a normal berserker. And yeah, so that's kind of Berserker. They're pretty straightforward, pretty chill, despite their name. Not much going on, but hey, they're really good paths. They can do a lot with a little. So let's see. So the sub archetypes of Berserker. So Bruiser, they're kind of already Bruiser to begin with, so we'll just skip over that. Crit Berserker used to be meta. Old meta dies hard, of course. Crit Berserkers can work if you're in multiplayer. I guess technically Crit Berserkers work better than Rogues in solo, because at least Berserkers have a lot of physical defense from the warrior tree, and also some debuffs, and also an attack buff. Right, Rogues don't have this. So getting that flat damage to multiply with crit power is really nice. Of course, rogues crit way more often than a warrior could, but it's still a balancing act. So yeah, crit berserkers are nice. It just depends on how you built them. If you go full strength and dexterity, solo can be a problem. Even though you have some bulk from the warrior tree, you're not invincible without endurance or any defensive gear, essentially. But if you go like 50 rogue, right? Because any crit path would 50 rogue, and then get some endurance and maybe some pieces of defense, then you can do that solo. You'll be at like 800, 900 crit chance. That should be fine. But if you're multiplayer, you can go full glass cannon, of course, just like a rogue would. So yeah, there's that. In mixed passive Berserker, kind of like mixed passive Necromancer, not as good because Berserkers buff up their physical damage output through Wolf Blow and Boiling Blood, but I suppose you get Fireball for free if you go mixed passive Mage. You don't get Wolf Blow for free if you go mixed passive, from the other trees, so essentially, I guess it's not that big of a deal because at least you get Fireball, and that's a decent bump there. So, yeah, not bad. Mixed passive Berserkers. If you're kind of playing Berserker but you want a little bit more like variety, I guess. Yeah, mixed passive Berserker is fine for that. And yeah, I think that's all for Berserker. A straightforward path, really strong, really reliable. Not the strongest, not the weakest. Pretty good path. Right. I forgot to show the Berserker gear. Of course. This is typical setup for most Berserkers. Do ignore the 30 rogue and 20 monk. That's more of a flavor thing. Most Berserkers would probably go down the Guardian tree and then the 25 points in the rogue tree just to get some extra attack. And the Guardian will give you some extra heal and defenses. But well, this is kind of a flavor character, but Berserkers, because their burst skill, their heavy skill, their damaging skill is earth, and plus there's a fair amount of earth on their tree. Most Berserkers would go earth, essentially. And yeah, you don't have to go earth, but it, a little bit more efficient, I guess you could say, if you do. And you'll see that with most builds that have like a heavy skill, like a monk's mostly use water. Uh, well, rogues don't really build an element, but if they had to, they would usually go water for their heavy skills and whatnot. Bards are kind of all over the place, really. They can go fire, but you don't really have to. But yeah, so that's kind of Berserker. Normally, what you would want some better magic defense than this, but when you have as much bulk as a warrior does, and also the elemental resistances can really help buffer out your magic defense. So because my magic defense is kind of low, but the elemental resistances will help with that, and you will kind of notice which enemies do magic damage that hurt. So like in Grand Dungeon, yeah, get some air resistance. It will help you out a lot. Yeah, so that's kind of the gear for most berserkers, of course. Really, really good attack, really good elemental power, good defense, good health. Also, you know, being a warrior and all. So yeah, right. And I suppose while I'm here, I'll go ahead and show the mixed passive berserker. Kind of a favorite of mine, although it's mostly because of role play. But yeah, just like the normal berserker, focusing on Earth. Um, because this berserker has both healing skills, I kind of went for more of a defensive setup. Get some heal power on there. Got some real uh, druid stats like having over 50 endurance and having 400 heal power, but that's more of a defensive set. Got a more balanced set for solo, and then a more damaging set if I really need to. But uh, yeah, mixed passive berserkers, they're pretty good. Not that bad at all. A really solid option. Um, and so yeah, it's kind of nice. Not too shabby. Right then. So wardens are kind of awesome. Just gonna say that off the bat. Pretty amazing paths here. So you know how the bulk from the warrior tree, it's just a lot, right? Well, what if you just add more and also give it some shielding on top of that? So yeah, wardens, kind of like druids, they are really good solo paths because their final passive will shield them for all damage they deal. Um, and plus they have a healing skill just to help with their recovery a bit. Just a nice little thing to have there. But yeah, wardens, they are a little tricky to gear because you kind of want some damage so your shield will, shield you. But you also, you're a tank, so you kind of need some defense to go with all that. Um, so it can be a little tricky to pull off, essentially. Uh, but that's mostly for solo. If you're doing multiplayer, you don't really need as much damage. So, and your shield will shield the lowest health party member, and that lowest health party member likely has a lot of damage, so they can shield themselves as long as you're attacking the enemy. Really nice path. A really supportive alternative to Guardian, because Guardian may be more of a wall, but Warden is more of a supportive tank, essentially, with the shield and all that. Also, the -1 defense and magic defense. Not many paths have that. Of course, all paths have like the opposite damage type on their tree, like cauterization and poison blow, having magic defense reduction. But uh, you'll have more of that essentially. As for gear, yeah, I kind of want some defense all around and some damage all around. So I've got like over 950 attack, of course. The defense, because wardens have so much defense up front, yeah, like I'm only getting 15 defense out of the set. Yeah, 500 base. Definitely recommend going 100 strength if you're not going mixed passive. Because you'll want all the defense you can get, and you can just kind of focus on magic defense gear to cover for your low magic defense, but you are a tank, so that's right. Also, wardens have a lot of health, so if you wanted to go health build, you can do that. Health builds are a thing, by the way. They are kind of scary, depending on what path you throw it on, but yeah, you can go health with that. Or you could try to go damage with that. But yeah, wardens are a nice uh, path all around, really. If you thought the Berserker was pretty chill, the Warden is even more chill. They don't have to worry about much of anything, really. As for these sub-archetypes, let's see. So a mixed passive Warden, right? Really good support tank. Like, if Warden is a support version of Guardian, mixed passive Warden is even more support because you can throw on some heal power and all that. Now this one is specifically a health Warden. Uh, this one can go over 2,000 health, and that's more for solo because my magic defense is kind of bad, but it can tank pretty well. But um, if you were going mixed passive, you could pick up a healing light, and you'll still have enough points to get unsettling stare and life surge from Guardian. So you'll have like a couple of good heals to help your party, survive essentially. On top of having that shield, on top of having a prominence. Yeah, so having prominence, the shield, and healing for your entire party uh, is a really good choice. Like, that means your party can focus more on dealing damage as opposed to keeping themselves alive, essentially. Not a bad option at all. Quite a strong one. And let's see, so Bruiser Warden is just a Warden, like they're naturally a Bruiser path, really? Yeah. And then there's Crit Warden. Crit Warden, you know how I said about their shield being really good with damage, if you throw crit on a Warden, that shield becomes really, really big. We'll go with that. I'm lacking words today, but yeah, so if you go full crit, or even like half crit, if you can crit decently well, you're going to shield yourself really well. To the point where you're not going to take any damage at all, like for an entire run, outside of the damage you took to get a shield in the first place. But yeah, so okay, I don't remember these sets at all, but yeah, so Crit Warden, really strong option, especially if you want to. Well, it's mostly for solo, really, but Crit Warden can tank relatively well. If you have 50 points in the rogue tree like this, right, and you put some defense gear on you, I don't have an example of that here. Whoa. Um, it's not bad at all. Um, and you won't really need as much heal power because you're shielding so much. It's just a nice option, but mostly for a solo play. Strong option nonetheless. So yeah, that's Crit Warden. Really good stuff there. Alright, I guess that leads me to Assassin. So Assassin is, well, kind of the DPS path of the game. They're all about the crits, all about the damage. I don't really have many archetypes here. I only have one assassin. Technically, I'm working on a mixed passive one, but I don't have a good level 100 example to show. But yeah, assassins kind of just straightforward. Get crit, get attack, and you're good to go. Really, get some crit power. So yeah, that's crit is their whole thing. All about the damage. Use your smoke bomb. Use your sneaky trap. You're gonna kill some people. Uh, but yeah, so that's kind of all Assassin's about. Getting just crits all around, dealing damage. Although I will say, because they're so focused on crit, they kind of lack other things. Like a ranger is kind of a more reliable crit build because they don't focus on crits as much, but they focus on things that surround crits essentially. And other pads have like a defense debuff, which is really nice for a crit build to have. So I guess you could go grab that. Other pads have like a damage buffs, things like that. And yeah, and also lucky. All other crit options have a lucky option. If I can find a lucky skill, lucky will roll your crit, deflect, and evade chances twice every time they happen, and take the best option. And that's really nice on a crit build to crit essentially. But assassins don't really have that, but they do have a lot of upfront just crit damage really, and also just damage here, like the huge skill, which is huge as a step up from heavy, essentially. So that's kind of all Assassin's about. Really straightforward path, mostly for multiplayer. You can level as a solo assassin, but you're going to need some defense in there. Which brings me to Bruiser Assassin. That's what this character is, all for solo. Does decently well in multiplayer because of how much crit damage it has. But good defense, decent magic defense because I've got 100 endurance, decent heal power. Actually, that's really good heal power for a rogue. The only issue is the attack. Now the attack, how I said, aim for 950, but you can go lower if you got good crit damage on a crit build. This is kind of evidence of that because despite the really low attack, this character still hits fairly well. Really well, actually. If you know what you're doing, essentially. So yeah. Also, the crit chance could be better. I understand, but again, mostly for solo. Got 50 points in the warrior tree, just so I got a lot of extra defense and on guard, which is really nice. Assassins and rogues especially can't really deal medium damage as much. Their slash is dependent on poison and bleed, and their poison and bleed do have limited uses. Warriors have thrust, and it's a lot easier to work around because they have on guard, which lasts a long time. Also, shield bash if they really need that extra defense. And mages have magic ball, which is kind of like the easiest one to go for. They can just spam magic ball all they want. Rogues, not so much. So having a thrust with on guard really just helps for just dealing some basic damage, and you can save these other skills for different situations where they are needed. So yeah, but all around, mostly for solo, the Bruiser Assassin. Mixed passive assassin, actually not that bad. Even though most people would like to go Bard for a mixed passive crit build because that's kind of their whole theme is mixed passive and crit with Bard. But going mixed passive assassin means that you don't have to worry about not having a defense debuff because, just mixed passives in general, which I will get into later. The big thing with mixed passive is that skills like Wolf Blow and Fireball are less important because you can just use a different damage type if an enemy resists one type of damage. So going mixed passive assassin means you can just deal with any enemy that has one damage type resistance, and most usually do. There's very few that resist both types of damage. So yeah, mixed passive assassin, strong option, really good, solid option, especially if you're trying to kill the tanks and you're having a hard time. And yeah, I guess that's all the archetypes: crit, bruiser, and mixed passive. Yeah, so that is that in a nutshell. Right. So I guess that leaves me to a ranger. Oh, if the ranger can handle it. Ranger is like I said, a more reliable version of assassin. They don't focus on crits too much, but they focus on things that really help a crit build in general. They have a defense debuff to get through tanks. They have a free lucky on the go that hits twice, and they have an evasion debuff. Uh, uh, Enemies evading is one big thing that kills crit builds because it doesn't matter how hard you hit. If an enemy evades, you're not going to hit them. So yeah, even though it's just -1, it's not going to reduce it that much. It's still something. still decent, and also they get evasion on themselves, so really strong alternative option to Assassin. Not as much damage, but will help your crits nonetheless. Also, really good debuff classes as well, between all the stuff that the rogue has and what you can get from other paths. But yeah, so also I don't have another example because this is kind of my only ranger, but working on a mixed passive ranger, I don't have a level 100 example just yet, just like Assassin. But kind of like Assassin, I went full Bruiser on this one. Of course, I went more attack and less defenses all around. So I've got 75 strength and endurance. Still got the 50 uh, warrior for the on guard and the extra defense and the health and all that. So yeah, pretty similar to my assassin, but a lot more attack, and also not too far from the crit chance either, huh? So I guess realistically, you could go 75 strength on the Bruiser Assassin. Probably better if you do. I just wanted to do that for the, just why not? Essentially. So yeah, this is Bruiser Ranger. Really good option for solo. Decent option for multiplayer. I mean, actually, it's got kind of the multiplayer damage, huh? They got nearly 950 attack and over 50 crit power. So yeah, I guess it's pretty good for multiplayer as well. Assuming you've got the gear for it. Some of this gear is really hard to get. Mixed passive ranger, I would say, is on par with Bard, possibly better than Bard when it comes to debuffing enemies, because going mixed passive ranger, you'll have minus three debuff for like a lot of things, like combining Song of Storms, Minute of the Forest, and Grappling Hook. That's -3 attack and magic debuff that you can throw at enemies if you need to. Fireball and Poison Blow, that's -3 magic defense. They've got a -3 physical defense debuff on their own. They got a -1 evasion, which is, again, kind of nice. I guess technically if you got over here, you can get -3 crit chance on an enemy as well. So yeah, really just a lot of things. Also, you can get shield bash pretty easily on top of Bullet of Fire. That's -3 uh, heal power. And also, yeah, I'm kind of old school. See, when you say -3, see like a Song of Storms, that's like a -2 magic debuff. That's from way back in the day when it used to say -2 instead of just down arrows. But yeah, you just stack that. So yeah, really, really a good debuff class. Also, really strong option. Like I said with Assassin, you don't have to worry about your defense debuffs as much with mixed passive. So, really good for solo. Decent in multiplayer because you can throw debuffs all day, and debuffs help your entire party. That's how things go. And then let's see. So yeah, this is Bruiser mixed passive. Normal Ranger. I don't really have normal Ranger, sad to say. I guess this is a better show of Bruiser. Not having so much crit chance, but having a lot of defenses all around. But yeah, so that's Ranger. Just a really reliable path for dealing crit damage if you want to do crit damage, and you don't want to have to deal with Assassin. It's the solo version of Assassin. We'll go with that. It's kind of what they are. So yeah, that's Ranger for you. Oh, right. One quick aside about Ranger. You see, and also this applies to Berserker as well. Arrow Storm hits twice, which is really nice for crit builds because enemies evade a lot, but enemies and players cannot evade twice in a row. So if you use Arrow Storm, you are guaranteed to at least deal some damage to an enemy. Really nice for any evasive enemies or just something really dangerous that's barely alive, and you want to make sure that they die. Yeah, really nice there. Same for the Berserker's Fury, hitting twice. Good, good stuff all around with that. Really helps it not die and all that. Yeah. Alright, so we got through all the base paths, and there are two end paths there, so let's look at the mixed paths, the mixed classes. Guardian to start. So, Guardian, right, big tank, all about the tanking. Good old thing. The only reason to go above 500 in both defenses is for your final passive. The more you deflect, the more you'll heal. So the more, the better. The big downside with this is that you will start sacrificing your damage, your heal power, possibly even your health. Something to keep in mind with that. Realistically, if you're just a normal guardian, I would say kind of stop at like 700 in both defenses, possibly 600. Between the different buffs you'll have, like on guard if you're going through the warrior tree and eyes on me, you likely won't need that much more. Defenses for your deflect chance, especially since you have like wind wall, which does last quite a while, and even though these +1 buffs don't really help your damage reduction, they really do make a difference in terms of your deflect chance. So you're likely not going to need a crazy amount of both defenses, but yeah, try to stop around 6 to 700 and focus more on damage and heal power and whatnot. But that's for Guardian. Now, Guardians are kind of themed around using mixed passive. So normally, for most Guardians, they would pick up like concentration and cauterization. That's a 60-40 Guardian split that most Guardians go for. It's a really good supportive, a decent supportive tank, because you have a lot of healing on the side. But you don't really need to do mixed passive if you don't want to. For example, this Guardian here is all about, or just, not having mixed passive. Mostly for solo. Of course, I will say a mixed passive Guardian is a little easier to deal with in solo. For example, over here, this mixed passive Guardian, because you get both damage types. You don't have to worry about stuff as much. And this is kind of a good example of a Guardian, stepping at 500 defenses and sort of building some damage and heal power and all that. But you can go much, much higher, of course. But yeah, so this is Guardian. Now, this Guardian is more a Bruiser Guardian, one of the archetypes I was talking about. Guardian is, of course, the tank in the Holy Trinity, but in terms of archetypes, so they got, offensive Guardians, really. That makes them kind of Bruiser to begin with. So, stepping at 500 in both defenses and then just getting some damage. Not a lot of room to build up elemental power to multiply that damage, but just having 950 at the very least, will do. Even without the multiplier there. Yeah, so that's a Bruiser Guardian. Really strong, really good solo option, but really decent in multiplayer. You can still get some good damage and defenses out of it, as you can see. Crit Guardian, I don't have one to show, but I have seen them. You can make that work. You can go to like 400 in both defenses. That is respectable for a tank. Especially a Guardian, because you have some defense buff to use, like eyes on me and whatnot. But the main thing is that your crit chance is going to be like 600 or 700, which is kind of decent, but you likely won't have a lot of crit power to go with it. But I would say it's a decent solo option. Not too shabby, really. Not too shabby at all. Yeah, so that's all the sub-archetypes. The Bruiser, the mixed passive being a little easier to work around, but you don't really need to do that. And just to show, yeah, with Guardian being mixed passive, you can go physical or magical. A little bit, easier to go physical because warrior has like all the good defensive stuff like on guard and stunning blow for the debuff and vibrating shield and even their own like a self heal and all that. Going mage, you'll likely be more a healer, a good substitute for a druid, I suppose. You'll be healing yourself and other people fairly well, but you won't have like the sheer amount of healing available. Like druids have a lot of healing skills and also some regen on the side. You likely won't have that, but again, if you're partying up with 2 damage dealers, then going mage guardian is a good option for you. Decent defense and magic defense, good heal power, low health, right? So something I probably should mention about guardians, you kind of want to focus on health because max health is what scales your deflect damage. So and your deflect damage is what heals you. Your final passive, the deflected amount is the same exact amount. So if you deflect for 60 damage, you're going to heal yourself for 60 damage. So you kind of want some health to go with that tankiness there, if you can, or at the very least try not to have much of anything that's going to reduce that health too much. These boots being an exception. These boots are probably like the best tank boots in the game. They're really good, but anyway, getting sidetracked there. Also, just a small little strategy you can do with a guardian. A little cheap, I'd say, but basically, because of the way guardians work, you can technically heal yourself with a guardian with the final passive. Normally, how it would go is if you got hit for, say, like, if an enemy hits you for less than 5% of your health, because that is how deflects work. Deflects will deal damage based on your max health, but if an enemy hits for less than 5%, which is how much deflect damage deals, 5% of your max health, then it'll be reduced to that amount. So if an enemy hits you for like 30 damage, you're not going to deflect for 60. You're going to deflect for 30. Even if your health is, you should be deflecting for 60, in other words. But one way you can kind of circumvent that is if you counter, you will gain a shield, right? And with that shield, enemies will deal damage to the shield first, but your deflect will heal you past that shield. A really good tip for like a struggling guardian, I guess. I can kind of show it here. Let me just let the riser hit me. Okay, if it can hit me, it's probably not a good test here, but I see how it is. The one time you don't crit me for, yeah, there you go. Okay, this is bad. This is a low level enemy, but you can't really see it. But if I were to counter, I would get the shield, and so you can see my health is at 1479. If I just don't do anything here, okay, well, assuming an enemy will hit me, but yeah, not a good time having bad RNG, but I will heal if they can hit me. Yeah, so I was at 1409 health, and now I'm at 1456. That's pretty much what that means there. You can heal a bit off of that, so a nice little tidbit for a guardian to do. And I believe that's all for guardian. Showcasing it, yeah, just build defense, get some damage in there, excuse me, if you can, and keep up with your max health, because that's where all your deflects come from. That's about it, really. Alright then, so we move on to the monk, another mixed path, another mixed class of a rogue and warrior. Yeah, except it's not quite themed after rogue or warrior, really. It's kind of its own thing. It's all about evasion and things like that. It's kind of a defensive class, really, but can be rather offensive. I guess it is kind of a good mix of rogue and warrior, but yeah, evasion's the name of the game. Of course, like I said before, evasion not that good on its own because you cannot evade twice in a row. But what the monk does, it does fairly well. You got a lot of evasion. You got a heavy skill here, so you're likely to be using a water weapon to scale the heavy damage of that skill. But yeah, keeping your evasion buffs up from different skills, kind of neat, kind of nice. I will say I don't have a pure rogue monk, but I do have kind of what Ged has over here, a warrior rogue monk. This is pretty good actually. You get plenty of defense from warrior. You get plenty of crit and all that damage from rogue, and then you get a bunch of evasion from a monk. So it's a pretty solid option. A little bit worse for wear in multiplayer. Like it's pretty good in multiplayer, but it's not as good as a pure rogue or a pure warrior per se. But it's still decent. This is a warrior. A lot of defense, magic defense, and having that evasion really just kind of helps with survivability. Evasion is not that good of a primary defense stat, but it is definitely a really good secondary defense stat. You know, like you don't want to be taking damage all the time. And because Monk has so much evasion up front, I don't really need to add much to my base evasion there. Some really good pieces of gear actually has evasion built in, so there is that. But yeah, so that is Monk, right? It's all about evading, keeping yourself alive. Really good debuffs on the with the Dragon Punch there. You have Ox Awareness, which gives you full lifesteal. Well, it gives you lifesteal on all damage you deal. 30% of your damage is stolen as life at any time. It's really good thing there, especially when it's paired with Lucky, which will roll your crit chance and evasions twice and take the better result of that. And Prominence, which is more for a tank. Yeah, Tank Monk is a thing. I'll show that in a second, but yeah, so Monk is all about that. I sadly cannot show Rogue Monk because I don't really have one. But Rogue Monk is a really good option, kind of like Ranger. If you're trying to go for a crit build or a glass cannon build and you want something a bit more reliable, Ranger and Monk are pretty good alternatives because they've got evasion, they've got debuffs, they've got Lucky, through Ox Awareness and Arrow Storm. Whereas Assassin doesn't really have any of that. They just have a whole lot of burst damage. So something to think about. So yeah, that's that. This is kind of close to a Tank Monk. Tank Monk, I believe I have one in this house. Yeah. A Tank Monk is actually pretty good. Okay, well this was mostly supposed to be a Health Monk, because why not? But Tank Monk is a solid option, I would say, for a tank. Yeah, like Guardian and Warden are kind of labeled as tanks, but Monk is a fairly decent tank path if you go for it. The big thing here is that you can evade attacks, obviously, but you can also evade redirected damage. So if you have Prominence up, and Prominence, it will cut the damage in half, so you'll take half damage for a teammate. You can evade that redirected damage to yourself, and the teammate will still get the damage reduction for that. So it's a really good tank path. It definitely can stay alive for quite a while, especially against really tough bosses, because they can evade a lot of dangerous attacks. But kind of like Guardian, it doesn't really offer much outside of Prominence. And it's even less than Guardian, because at least Guardian can throw a heal out or two. I guess technically Monk can as well, but with the life surge up there. But outside of Prominence, it doesn't really help the team as much. But being a monk, it has a decent amount of upfront damage. So like this monk here, even though it has 100 strength, but still it's got decent damage for what it is, a tank. A really good evasion there too, but yeah, Tank Monk is a solid option if you don't want to go Warden or Guardian. If you want to do some solo stuff without having to sacrifice your attack and all that. Really good health as well, even though the Monk tree doesn't have health on it, no, but it's got some crit on there. Yeah, having a little bit of crit in there too is kind of nice for Lucky. So when you have Ox Awareness up, Lucky will make it so you crit more often, and having just a little bit of crit is kind of nice for that. Also, one other benefit with a Monk, their prominent skill is not a damage skill. Alright, so Provoking Gaze and Unsettling Stare and Eyes on Me, these are all damage skills. These can miss, so if a teammate is really low on health and you really need to get prominence back up because it only lasts 3 turns, sometimes you can miss with your prominence skill and that teammate might die. Whereas Monk, it's a buff essentially. You don't have to damage anyone with it. So something to keep in mind with that. It's a really nice buff too. So yeah, that is that. Also, mixed passive Monk. I don't have a mixed passive Monk in this house. But mixed passive Monk is really nice. I would say it's really, really nice because you can get Healing Light, which will also give you another evasion buff. And couple that with the Life Surge, and that's a lot of extra healing for you. And yeah, I mean, mixed passive Monk, a solid option. Really strong. Especially if you have a hard time with, just dealing with tanky enemies, because Monk doesn't have any passive damage. Like, if you get on the Warrior Monk and you don't pick up, like, No Mercy or something like that, yeah, Monks don't really get any damage. They have, like, an extra evasion buff, or passive, I should say. So yeah, going mixed passive means you don't have to worry about having low damage, because you'll have Fireball and Wolf Blow and all that, so something to keep in mind. So I think that's all. The Tank Monk, the mixed passive Monk, and the Crit Monk. All solid options. Really strong options there. Strong class all around. Yeah. So that is that. Alright, well, I figured why not show a mixed passive Monk just right quick. This is mine. Got 50 points in Warrior, just, Warrior Monk. I went ahead and got a Healing Light. That's a given. Like, without Healing Light, it wouldn't be much point in going mixed passive Monk. I mean, I guess, you still could, but, that's just a nice bonus. Having that heal and an evasion buff. And with the rest of the points, I decided to just go get some healing the last 20 points. So I got Life Surge, which is also nice because you also get Wind Wall. Wind Wall is a pretty good skill. And then I just picked up a Scorching Daggers for a little bit extra healing, and also having a physical fire skill that's medium. So yeah, good option all around. Really strong. Really good solo class as well. The damage is a little low because, again, Monk does not have any passive damage, but between the evasion, the defense, and especially the healing, you will keep yourself alive in solo and be really decent in multiplayer. So yeah, there is that. Alright then, so last but not least, definitely not least, we have Bard. Bard being a little, I would say, overrated. Like, it is a good class, but people tend to put it up to this monocle of being the best path in the game. So Bard, the main thing about Bard is its debuffs and also its high base stats, right? So looking at the Bard, its main thing is mixed passive and crit, because it's supposed to be like a mix of mage and rogue. So mage and rogue naturally will be mixed passive, and rogue has crit. Also, bards can also be healers, so a really good representation of a mix between mage and rogue, essentially. But yeah, really high base stats there. As you can see at the top there, 3 attack and magic agility, crit chance, and even heal power. all nice things to have, regardless of which type of bard you go for. Um, so yeah, it's all about debuffs. You debuff your enemies, and then your final passive will give you that debuff as a buff. Uh, so basically, just a lot more, just a lot of stats. Basically, I will say it's not as good as it sounds, though, depending on how you go about it. If you're just going like a normal bard that does not do crit, so like a bruiser bard, these debuffs will only last for 2 turns, and thus their buffs will last for 2 turns. 2-turn buffs are not that good, in my opinion. They're okay, but enemies evade a lot in this game, so that 2-turn buff might really be a 1-turn buff, essentially. But yeah, there's that. So going down the list of the different archetypes of bard, well, I guess I can start with crit. This is a crit bard, non-mixed passive, because again, with any mixed path like monk and guardian, you have the choice of going mixed passive, but okay, I guess guardian and bard, because they're both half mages, but basically they're themed after going mixed passive, but you don't have to. So this is a crit, it's a crit bard. Probably should go 100 strength, so my attack is above 900, but whatever. Yeah, crit bards are pretty straightforward. I'll say you already have a defensive debuff, but I do find going for Wolf Blow to be fairly advantageous. You could grab a grappling hook to give you a 4-turn or 5-turn attack and magic buff, but I find that's not really worth the point investment there. At least, just in my opinion, but, getting that extra health and Wolf Blow and even the lifesteal skill from Warrior, really nice choice there. Also, Shield Bash, really good for bards, because you'll have a heal power buff, which, if you're a mage bard, you probably don't care about it because you already have concentration, but if you're a crit bard and you don't go down the mage tree, then yeah, having that extra healing will make it so your actual healing and also your lifesteal will heal yourself a lot more. So there's that to consider. If you're not going to get concentration, at least get Shield Bash. It's a really good skill for bards. Well, it's a good skill for anyone, really. So yeah, and also something to keep in mind with crit bard. Try and see if you can get Dragon Punch, because that's a +3 crit chance buff there. That's a lot of extra crit chance. Couple that with critical shooting, and that's a lot of damage up front. Yeah, something to keep in mind with that. So yeah, that is crit bard. Really strong class actually. Crit bard is kind of the only bard I like because their debuffs last an extra turn, so it becomes a 3-turn buff. Excuse me, and that means that these buffs might actually do something outside of just 1 turn. No, because if an enemy evades, that buff will still be up for another turn. So it's a good strong option. Also, they have a huge skill, kind of like Assassin, but only has 2 uses, and also it's a split physical magical half and half thing, so not as scalable as Assassin's Sneaky Trap down here, but still a huge skill. Nonetheless. So that is crit bard. I believe I have a mixed passive crit bard, which is this is kind of what the class is sort of themed after, going mixed passive and going crit. And yeah, bard has a lot of base damage, so your attack and magic are going to be really high when you do that. And they have decent crit chance, so your crit's going to be decent as well. Probably should go for some different gear there. I don't need this much attack and magic, to be honest, but oh well, I'll figure that out later. But yeah, so this is kind of more on theme with bard. Mix passive, grab a dragon punch because it's a really good skill on bard, a crit bard anyway. Put 5 points in warrior just for the shield bash, and went ahead and picked up healing light just because it's a healing skill and it's nice. Also, going mixed passive, really, that heals please, plus 85 heal power. That is really nice. I'll kind of get into that when I go into the different sub archetypes of each thing, but yeah, really good all around. Not as strong as the non-mixed passive, at least on my part, because this character is a newer character and it doesn't have all the good crit gear that the old bard does. But uh, yeah, so that's like mixed passive crit bard. That's again on theme with what they do. So yeah, let me see. Yeah, so this is a bruiser. I guess you can kind of lump bruiser and mixed passive bard together. Because if you get on like the mage tree, you're gonna likely be a bruiser, right? Um, so this is bruiser bard. Bards make really great bruisers. They've got a lot of base damage, so they can kind of focus on just building up a lot of defenses, right? So really high endurance. Don't need as much attack and magic or strength and will, I should say, because a lot of that is taken care of for you. This bard in particular was more focused around the defense buffs you get. So I've got 40 points in warrior for on guard. But in general, you have a lot of options when it comes to just a mixed passive bard that is not crit. You can kind of do whatever you want, really. You can go grab like no mercy for extra damage and go down the guardian tree if you want some like tankiness and heals, or possibly even just go down the warrior tree for extra bulk and whatnot, or finish out the mage tree. A lot of options for bard there. But as I said before, their buffs will only last 2 turns, so their final passive is less of a thing, less important. And because you have concentration if you go mage bard, you don't really need shield bash as much. But I guess it's kind of nice to just have a heal buff that deals damage instead of having to waste a turn for it. But yeah, so a strong option, a little basic with the building, but there's a lot of variety, a lot of how would you put it? You have a lot of options, I should say. You can kind of handle whatever the game throws at you. Uh, so yeah, there is that. Good old, good old overrated bard, as it were. Uh, but yeah, really high stats. So just fill the gaps in with stats you need. Mostly just defense and magic defense. But yeah, I'm rambling now. So yeah. All right. So that was kind of an overview of all the different paths in the game. Quite a lot of options, eh? But there was technically a secret 10th path. Oh, and what would that be? Well, that would be simply a pathless. Yeah, you heard me right. You can kind of just not choose a path and have the benefits of other uh, basic trees. So, like this one, for example, the common example, having 75 points in 2 different trees, really strong option there. The main thing with going pathless, like classless, really, is you would kind of want passives that give you a lot of extra stats, because having a lot of base stats can kind of uh, cover for you not having a final passive. So no final passive, no cool, unique like effect going on there, but you will have like a lot of base stats essentially. Uh, Kind of like Bard, because Bard's final passive doesn't always work either. That's bad, but yeah. So if you want to try going pathless, because the sky is the limit when it comes to doing this. This is a good example. This is one of the strongest ones I have, going all in on the different stats there. So I've got really good health from the warrior, defense from the warrior, both defenses from the guardian, a lot of base damage with the what's it called, with the bard, and a lot of good heal power and magic defense from the mage. So, and I stop at different points, like the Bard's 25-point passive gives a lot of extra stats. Same with the Guardian's 25-point passive. You could go like further, like the mages and the 50-point mage and warrior give you. I mean, it's not core stats, but they are like really nice extra stats. The powers and resistances, they really help buffer your damage and defenses. So really nice there. You could possibly go further into Magic Core or the Stone Strike for extra stats there. You could even go down, if you wanted to go a Rogue, like another good option, a 75 Rogue and Warrior. That's also a really strong one. I believe someone on Discord discovered that one. Actually, someone on Discord discovered just going Pathless in general, Goonie or Goonster. He kind of started this whole shebang, and yeah, his main build was 75 Rogue, 75 Warrior. You get a lot of base attack and a lot of extra defense and crit chance. It's a really, really good option for you there. But yeah, you can kind of just go for whatever. But again, as I said, if you want to do that, you can, if you want to have a nice variety of different skills from different paths and kind of make your own unique little character, I would definitely recommend, if you can, try and get stat passives, especially for going mixed passive. Going mixed passive can be a little rough on your damage because mixed passives don't have a lot of damage up front. So, yeah. So yeah, try and get some damage passives or stat passives, I should say, to help buffer out your stats. So not having a final passive isn't going to hurt you so much, as it were. So yeah, that is kind of all for Pathless. Again, a lot of theory crafting. Sky's the limit. There's a character builder in Discord you could use if you want to figure things out from there. It's a nice thing. So yeah, so that is that. Indeed. So before we end this off, because it's long-winded, I said it would be kind of brief. I guess it kind of is if you use the chapter section on YouTube and you can just look for something you care about. But I'll go over the different archetypes and sub-archetypes just like in more detail. Like the Holy Trinity. The Holy Trinity is pretty self-explanatory: tank, damage dealer, and healer. I kind of went over that with the threshold like stat guide, like try and get to this amount of stats or this amount of stats. Pretty straightforward. But the sub-archetypes could use a bit more closer examination, I guess you could say. So I'll start with mixed passive, right? Mixed passive, one big thing, I probably mentioned a lot throughout this video. One big thing with them, they have lower base damage, and that can be an issue, especially if you are something like a Druid or a Warden that has less damage up front than most other paths, because Druid and Warden, like Druid gets 1 magic per point, and Warden gets no attack per point. They get it all defense and whatnot. So yeah, it can be a little tricky to pull off, but yeah, so in those cases you'll need like a lot more damaging gear. Like for example, this Druid here has mostly offense gear because I kind of need it to get my attack and magic, pretty high, or high enough, I should say. But yeah, I would say mixed passive at the end game is actually a lot easier to deal with than not going mixed passive. Truth be told, because at the end game, Grand Dungeon, most enemies, actually 99% of the enemies in Grand Dungeon resist one type of damage or another, even if it doesn't say they do. Like the watery drop, actually no, it does say it does. Oh wow, Roy, are you changing things without telling people? Okay, well, Flame Spark resists physical damage slightly. Doesn't say that here, but things like that. Each enemy resists a type of damage, and going mixed passive kind of alleviates that. It also alleviates not needing defense debuff. So not having Wolf Blow as a mage is not that big a deal. I mean, it can be useful, but you don't really need it. It's just nice to have. And if you are playing a mixed passive build that happens to have Fireball and Wolf Blow, that means you can use that for tankier enemies that don't resist that type of damage, but still are, they're kind of bulky. They still have a lot of health and whatnot. A good example, I guess I can show here. Firewind Shields. Firewind Shields resist physical damage, but they're still fairly tanky. Like they are a tankier enemy, so they still have a decent amount of magic defense as well. So you can use Fireball on Firewind Shields to kill them quicker. Instead of throwing Fireball at Boggy Chubby, which is kind of the magic version of Firewind Shields. Normally, if you're a mage, you need to save your Fireballs for Boggy Chubby because they have a lot of magic defense. But if you're going mixed passive, you can save it for Firewind Shields, and even then, you don't really need a Fireball for Firewind Shields. You can just hit them with magic damage, and more often than not, it's enough to kill them pretty quickly. So yeah, that's kind of the main thing with mixed passive builds. They have a lot of options. There's a lot of versatility with their whole thing. It's just that they don't have a lot of base damage. Now, of course, you can get more damage later on. It just takes a lot of effort and really good gear, essentially. And for that reason, mixed passive builds are not as good in multiplayer unless the path you're using is themed around it. So like Bard and Guard. Bard is all about mixed passive, right? Their stats are really good, and if you're going mixed passive, you're likely going to be going down the Bard tree if you can. If you can reach it, because warriors can't get to Bard, but still. But yeah, so in multiplayer, enemies are a lot beefier than their solo counterparts, so you will need some base damage there. And not going mixed passive means you can focus on one type of damage to hit hard. But going mixed passive, you're going to have to lower that down. A general rule of thumb, all right, say you get everything for 1,000 attack, you'll have 1,000 attack, common example. But if you split that 1,000 attack between attack and magic, you'll have 500 attack and magic. And then you add on the mixed passive multiplier, you will get to 825, I believe, attack and magic. Because 65% extra attack and magic. So that's quite a bit lower, a lot lower than 1,000, as it were. So yeah, it's something to think about. Of course, mixed passive gear is actually really good. You know how I said about strength and will being really like your core stats? Well, they are still your core stats, but you can really bump up your damage with mixed passive damage gear. Like these earrings here, that's a lot of extra stats. That's like 70 damage stat, right? As opposed to, I think the highest is like 60 for a single damage type, like the Magic Earth Orb here. But these are kind of rare. I believe it's mostly like 53, 54. You got the Shower Spear there. That's the most you'll kind of get, but a lot of mixed passive gear has like well over 50. Like the Mirror Shield there gives you attack and magic. This Harp here that you can see that I have equipped, that's 74 worth of attack and magic combined. So there is that to kind of help your damage out. But yeah, personally, I would say if it's your first time somehow, I probably don't want to go mixed passive unless you really want to. Like it is a lot to keep up with, balancing your attack and magic and all that. But personally, I prefer mixed passive because just having that versatility is really nice. I can handle not doing as much damage up front, really. Especially since I'm a solo player. As for leveling, right, a really big important thing for mixed passive when leveling, if you want to go mixed passive, better to start as a mixed passive. Trying to level into it is really difficult because you'll have to start putting points into the opposite damage type. So if you're like a mage and you have like a lot of will, you're going to start putting points into strength, and it's not really going to be balanced at all for a long time. Especially if you're low level. Low level gear does not give a lot of attack and magic at all. Um, so yeah, so using that whole thing I said at the beginning, where you get the free respec potions at level 30 and 70, you can use that. So at level 30, you can uh, spec into mixed passive by going 15 points in mage and rogue, or mage and warrior, and go from there. And as you level up, you can put points into the opposite type. So if I were going on the mage tree, as I level up, I'd put points into strength and occasionally endurance or will, because strength gives you 4 attack, but mage gives you 3 magic. So a little bit of balancing act there. But yeah, again, easier to start out as mixed passive, and it's way harder to try to level into it. Another thing with mixed passives, I'm just going to warn you right now, you're going to struggle really hard when you get to Grand Dungeon. When you hit level 80 and you get to Grand Dungeon, it's going to be tough because enemies are much bulkier, right? But they don't hit as hard as floor 8 enemies, essentially. So for most other builds that don't go mixed passive, there is a difference, but they can kind of get through because they'll have like 800 or 900 attack or magic, or at least they can through gear get that much attack or magic. But mixed passive, you're going to be kind of struggling depending on which one you are, what path you are. You're going to be sitting at like a 700 or 800 attack and magic. That's not a whole lot at the very beginning of Grand Dungeon. You're going to be struggling to kill the first boss, especially. Grand Dungeon is all about killing enemies before they eventually wear you down with 1,000 attacks. So death by 1,000 needles sort of thing. So yeah, so mixed passive, you're going to struggle at the very beginning. But when you get to like level 90 or so and you get some extra damage passives, things will even out. And by the end, you'll be like really breezing through Grand Dungeon because you'll have a good amount of both damage types, and you can kill any enemy that comes your way because you can target an enemy's weakness, essentially, with attack or magic. Now, of course, this can be circumvented by just simply getting some damage passives before Grand Dungeon, like Heads and Tails from Rogue, or Bard, I should say, No Mercy from the Rogue, and possibly even Fleet Footwork, just things that give you some back or magic to help you out there get through the beginning portions of Grand Dungeon. So yeah, that is that. That's mixed passive. Mixed passive, honestly, really great. You do have your struggles in there, but I'd say it's worth the struggle, getting through there. So that is mixed passive. The other one, crits. Right. I kind of went over crit pretty well throughout the entire thing. The main thing with crit, I would say, if you're going glass cannon, level in multiplayer. Glass cannons do not perform well in solo at all. So, I mean, they can. If they get lucky, like if you crit all the time and you happen to evade a decent amount and you one-shot like half the enemies that come your way, then yeah, you can get through a dungeon unscathed. But that's like a lucky once in a million run. This game is very RNG heavy, so you're going to be missing your attacks a lot. You're not going to be critting as much as you want to. Even if you put like 100 points in dexterity and a bunch of crit gear, it does not guarantee that you're going to be critting all the time. So again, RNG heavy game. So if you're going glass cannon, you can just go multiplayer. Multiplayer will level you up pretty quickly. There's no cooldown to it. And if you don't have anyone to play with, the AI controlled bots, these 9 lovely fellows here, they will help you with your multiplayer shenanigans. And it's not that bad. You just queue up in solo, and eventually it'll start, and you'll have a multiplayer thing there. So yeah, so glass cannons probably do that. Also, you can level in the arena as well if you want to. I've heard that it gives decent XP, so I've never done it myself. I'm not really a PvP person, but it's there if you want some extra experience. So yeah, that's crit builds. Again, I kind of went over them in the stat sort of thing, but glass cannons in general. I guess I could say when it comes to not being a crit build and you want to deal damage with elemental power, or I guess crit builds and elemental power, I should say, which one is better? I would say go elemental power a bit more than crit damage. Or crit power, I should say. Main reason being, you're not going to be critting all the time. Elemental power works all the time. It works for you. Of course, corresponding elements, right? But yeah, I would say if you had to pick one or the other on a piece of gear, like you do want both, right? But elemental power is a lot more reliable, and I think crit power might hit a bit harder. But again, you might not do more DPS, uh, as it were, with crit powers. So something to keep in mind there for you glass cannon maximum damage likely necromancer enthusiasts. So yeah, just something to think about. And what was that last one? Oh right, Bruisers, right? Hey, Bruisers, my fellow Bruisers. Yeah, not much to say on Bruisers. I kind of explained them pretty well, going like, a lot of attack, decent defense. This is actually a perfect example of a Bruiser. Mixed passive Bruiser, I guess you could say. Over 900 attack and magic, 300 in both defenses at the very least. Because it's a druid, it has really good heal power as well. Just a side thing, a warden would have a lot more defense. A berserker would have a lot more damage up front, like things like that. But this is kind of a good example of what a bruiser would look like at the end game. Yeah, so not much to say on bruisers really. I've already kind of went over them pretty in depth already, but kind of like glass cannons, but the opposite. Bruisers are better in solo because the Holy Trinity is really effective in multiplayer. I'll say having a damage dealer that deals a lot of damage instead of just decent damage. Having a tank that could take a lot of damage, but not just like decently okay. Essentially, it's a place of extremes, I should say. A bruiser not hitting as hard as a glass cannon, but not being tanky enough, and likely not having prominence to be considered a tank, and likely not even being a healer, because there's warriors can just be bruisers too. A lot better in solo, but I would say they're still fairly decent in multiplayer. Like if you wanted to go a bruiser like Berserker, for example, you'll still do decent enough damage to get through multiplayer. Really, I'll say if you can, or if there is no tank, I guess you could kind of help by debuffing enemies, because that's what warriors kind of do. They debuff enemies really, really well. Um, yeah, I'm losing my words here, but yeah, bruisers better for solo. They're kind of designed around solo because you can take hits, you can deal damage, you can keep yourself alive. Multiplayer, you really want high damage characters. You want super tanky tanks, and you want really good healers, essentially. Although I guess realistically, that's really for the end game. Yeah. Mid game, like it's nice to have the Holy Trinity, but sometimes you don't really need a tank. Sometimes you don't really need a healer. Since all paths can, uh, all paths have sustain in some way. Like rogues have lifesteal, warriors just have bulk. Like they don't take that much damage, and mages have their own like actual heals. So a party of like a necromancer, a berserker, and I don't know, like a ranger or something like that. That could still work. Each one has options to heal themselves. Someone does magic damage, someone does physical damage. No big deal there. It could be, like it's still decently. It's just at the end game, you really want a tank, a damage dealer, and a healer. Ideally, I mean, you don't always need to, but ideally, right? So that's kind of all for the sub archetypes. Oh, I guess there is a fourth hidden one. I forgot to mention throughout the entire video, I think, and that's health builds. Health builds, they're kind of like bruisers, but just sort of an alternative to a bruiser. It's a sub archetype of a sub archetype. Okay, well this is a health druid, but health builds are really really great, right? Uh, Not so much in multiplayer because again you'll be hitting for even less. Like health builds, they bump up their health a lot, and because of that, they are really durable, and they can heal themselves exceedingly well. Depending on what path you are, of course, like going health rogue is probably not a good idea because all of your healing is based on your damage and not your health, but still. Um, Two of my best characters, or two characters that are really good of mine, Health Druid and Health Warden. Warden has the most health in the game because of their tree. They get more health than any other path in the game. Yeah, 2 health as opposed to just 1 health from other places. And Warden has their own heal buff and whatnot, and it's a really strong path, or a really strong build, I should say. Even if their shield is based on their damage, because you have so much health, you're not really in any danger. If you're at half health as a health warden, you still have 1,000 health. And yeah, something to keep in mind. Um, Health Warden has 2,000 health. Base health, like a level 100 character, regardless of what path you are, is 1,200. So yeah, very very durable there. And in the druid's case, because all of their heals are based on health, and even regen is also based on max health, you're going to be recovering a lot. Health druid does not die at all, which is what this is, a health druid. Now, the main issue with health builds is that one, they're kind of a little too straightforward, a little boring, I guess you could say, because every health build would use the same. Oh god, excuse me, the same tree, really. They would at least have 25 warrior and 25 guard because they both give health, like, from the passives. And this gear right here is likely what you're going to be using. It's a perfect balance of attack and magic. Okay, well, it's not perfect, but close enough. Um, Perfect balance and a lot of health all around. But this is kind of like the best health gear in the game. There is a helmet that comes from a dungeon keeper that has this same health here as a hat, but it has some heal power on top of that. But health builds have really low damage, really, so something to keep in mind if you want to try a health build. It'll get lower damage, and really straightforward, samey gear and tree, but uh, they are kind of awesome in terms of just getting through solo content. So yeah, so that's all of the sub archetypes, I guess you could say. The Bruisers, the Glass Cannon crit builds, the mixed passives, and I guess the health builds as well. Um, so yeah, that is kind of everything. Now, it might be a lot, but the sheer amount of build variety in this game is what makes it so great, at least for me. And plus, all the strategy that comes with that. But there's so much, like all of the things I talked about, the sub archetypes, right? the Bruiser makes passive crit. Those three things, they can be applied to all 9 paths. Well, 10 paths if you count Pathless, right? So that's a lot of things you can work around and do and try to Frankenstein your own build together if you don't want to do anything normal. I mean, hey, I'm right there with you. It is a lot of fun to theory craft in this game. And couple that with the amount of content that this game has, like there's a lot of things to kill. Time flies by when you're killing monsters, definitely. Uh, but yeah, I think that is all for this little build guide. A little rough on the edges, but I'd say it's a lot better than the first one I made. Again, wasn't really too satisfied with the first one. Wanted to give it a better coat of paint. Still wish I could edit these videos, or just edit videos in general, because I don't have a computer. I'm all mobile. I'm a poor soul, so you know how it is. But yeah, I think that is all in terms of build advice, and I guess accidentally an overview of all the paths in the game. I do hope you enjoyed. I hope this was more informative. Please, by all means, ask more questions in the comments, and if you want more than just my opinion, go on Discord. The Discord up here, linked at the top of the settings here. There's a lot of good people on Discord that will help you out if you want a second opinion, or or just want to know something, really, just anything at all. Do ask. I'm on there as well. But yeah, I shall see you around. Pray for thee, good Lord.